On March 20th, 2021, Brianna Micciolo dropped off her 6-year-old son, Corey, to spend the weekend with his father, Christopher Gregor. The two met when Brianna was just 16 and Christopher was 21, and he got her pregnant soon after. Up until now, Christopher didn't even know he had a son, leaving Brianna to raise Corey all by herself. Things changed when just recently a paternity test showed that Christopher was the father, and as a result, the court gave him custody over Corey after being absent for his son's entire life. Later that same day, after Corey was dropped off on the 20th of March, Christopher took him to the gym at his apartment complex. Christopher had been making comments about his 6-year-old son, saying that he was getting fat. Putting aside how inappropriate these comments would be, one look at the CCTV footage from that day shows these comments were also just plainly not even true. Christopher was needlessly being cruel to his son, whom he hadn't even known until just recently. But that's only where the punishment began that day. Christopher commanded Corey to get on the treadmill and start running so he would lose weight. Surveillance footage shows him watching over his son as he starts running until Christopher rapidly begins increasing the speed of the treadmill, forcing Corey to run faster than he could keep up with. Corey tried his best, but he simply wasn't quick enough and fell face first multiple times. But Christopher didn't care. He made his son get back up, physically lifting him back onto the treadmill. The intensity only went up from there as Christopher continued to increase the speed and incline to the point where Corey was sprinting, but it still wasn't enough. At this point, Corey was exhausted. He can be seen repeatedly falling down over and over again, hitting his head a total of 6 times. Christopher kept pushing him harder the whole time, at one point even appearing to bite his son to keep him running on that treadmill, no matter how much he wanted to stop. Finally, Christopher had enough, at which point he stormed out of the gym without his son. Corey was seen trailing behind him and chasing after his father, as he barely even acknowledges his presence. After that weekend, Brianna picked Corey back up and immediately became worried. She noticed bruises all over him, including on his forehead. Fearing the worst, she called Child Protective Services, but nothing was done. She then took him to a pediatrician, but according to testimony, the doctor claimed that nothing serious was found other than bruises consistent of falling. While this could have been chalked up to Corey roughhousing a little too hard, in retrospect, it's clear that Brianna was right to be concerned for her son's safety around Christopher. Brianna feared for her son's life, so she filed an emergency request for custody. Tragically, she found out on April 1st that her request was denied. The court had stated that it does not find Corey is in danger of immediate or irreparable harm. It would later be found that Brianna had reported Christopher of suspected abuse over 100 times prior to the treadmill incident, and yet no action was taken to protect Corey. Left with no other options, Brianna was forced to drop Corey back off with Christopher. Tragically, less than a day after Brianna's emergency request for custody was denied, Corey passed away. By all accounts, Corey was feeling fine when Brianna dropped him off on the morning of April 2nd, but by 4 p.m. that same day, things took a drastic turn for the worse. It started after Corey woke up from a nap feeling nauseous and struggling to breathe. He began slurring his speech and stumbling around. At that point, Christopher called Brianna to tell her he was taking Corey to the hospital. CCTV footage showed him arriving at the hospital with Corey's limp body in his arms. Christopher remained stoic and emotionless, all while watching his son fighting to stay alive. Hospital staff sprung into action with one nurse describing Corey's breathing as dire end-of-life breaths. By this point, Corey had become completely nonverbal. His body remained limp and motionless as his head slumped back and forth as he was rushed into the examination room. Unlike Christopher, the hospital treated this as an all-hands-on-deck situation. Corey experienced a massive seizure as he was brought in for a CT scan. He then suffered 2 cardiac arrests as hospital staff rushed to bring him back to life. During what would be any parent's worst nightmare, CCTV footage and cell phone logs showed Christopher casually walking out of the room and leaving the hospital alone around 5:20 p.m. While everybody deals with grief in different ways, it is truly shocking to see someone go from carrying his son into the hospital to being informed of their death and just casually driving home all within an hour. Given the unusual circumstances surrounding the situation, police were immediately brought in to get more information. Christopher was already on the way home when the police showed up to the hospital for questioning. Within minutes of Corey's death, Brianna called Christopher 3 times, but he ignored her each time. Shortly after that, Christopher rejected a call from the local police sergeant and again ignored a second call from the same sergeant minutes later. As soon as Christopher got home, he began searching online for things like, can your phone be traced in airplane mode, and can my car be tracked? The next day, he continued his searches with questions like, how does gastrointestinal bleeding happen? And can such a bleed be slow? Clearly, Christopher knew his actions played a part in Corey's untimely death, as he continued searching for incredibly specific questions like, there was a murder determination from an autopsy, how long to file charges. It was at this point when Christopher knew he was in trouble, as he decided to flee the state. Cell phone data indicated he was on the move, with his phone pinging all across New Jersey down to the southwestern corner of Arkansas. Christopher had been at large for over 2 days since his son's passing, when he was eventually pulled over by law enforcement for speeding in a construction zone in Tennessee. Body cam footage from that encounter with police showed Christopher blaming his son's death entirely on Brianna. Authorities seized Christopher's phone during the traffic stop. However, they did not have enough evidence to arrest him for Corey's death. It wouldn't be until 3 months later, when police obtained footage from the gym at Christopher's apartment, where they were able to see firsthand how twisted he truly was. They then had everything they needed to arrest him. Christopher was charged with murder and endangering a child. As the case began unfolding in the coming months, a forensic pathologist was brought in to determine how exactly Corey died. That doctor found that homicide was the most likely manner of death, removing any doubt that it could have been some sort of freak accident instead of Christopher's direct actions that brought an end to his son's life. In fact, it was discovered that Corey showed signs of suffering even more injuries than what he endured during the treadmill incident. According to Dr. Thomas Andrew, Corey suffered an acute traumatic injury to the heart just hours before passing away, meaning that Christopher likely hit him even more after Brianna dropped him off that day. In total, the autopsy revealed that Corey suffered multiple blunt impacts to the chest and stomach, lacerations of the heart, contusions of the left lung, and lacerations and contusions of the liver. What makes this so chilling is thinking about how many times Christopher got away with this. The treadmill incident was the only time he was caught on camera. Taking into account the hundreds of reports that Brianna filed, it's incredibly likely that Christopher made Corey's final months a living hell. Fortunately, Corey felt the true love of his mother, as Brianna did everything she could to protect him and give him a good life. And she intended to see justice for her son. Christopher was initially arrested for endangering the welfare of a child on July 7th, but due to a New Jersey bail reform law, he was released until finally being arrested again 8 months later. Christopher's trial began in May of 2024. The jury was forced to watch every second of the gruesome footage from the treadmill incident, as well as many other details that make this case even more heartbreaking. One of the investigators on the case was Sergeant Matthew Scuddy. He testified about the state of Christopher Gregor's home, saying that the smell of cleaned or dried vomit was emanating from Corey's bedroom. This coincided with Brianna, claiming that Corey's clothing appeared to have dried vomit stains on them. During the trial, Christopher's attorneys attempted to argue that Corey passed away from natural causes related to sepsis. They claimed that all of the bruises and injuries he sustained in the months leading up to and during the treadmill incident came from life-saving techniques. This seems incredibly unlikely to be true, considering Brianna had extensive photos and evidence of her son's injuries going back for months. It is pretty remarkable how much evidence of Corey's injuries Brianna had, and yet her pleas for help were all ignored. Anytime a child has unexplained injuries is a cause for concern, even more so when it keeps happening for months on end. Seeing on video just how willing Christopher was to put his son in a situation where he could, and ultimately did, get seriously hurt makes this case infuriating. To make matters worse, Christopher had a known history of criminal behavior in the past. He was arrested for robbery, assault, and malicious destruction of property while working as a math teacher in 2018. However, for some reason, he was never convicted for these crimes. The trial concluded on May 31st of 2024 after 11 days. The jury found Christopher Gregor guilty of aggravated manslaughter and endangering the welfare of a child. In the end, he was ultimately sentenced to a total of 25 years in prison. While justice was fortunately served in this case, it doesn't remove the fact that Corey's passing could have been entirely avoided if action was taken sooner. Brianna is now suing the New Jersey Division of Child Protection for failing to protect Corey properly.